So a few months ago, I released a video on this channel about how Red Rising by Pierce Brown was one of the most polarizing sci-fi books of all time. Now, this is a book and series that has absolutely rabid fans and an equally rabid group of detractors. Now, I was really curious about it. I'd heard so much about this book, I had to read it for myself, and I certainly had thoughts. And so did you in the comments. Certainly not breaking up the argument at all that it's certainly a divisive book, as there were folks on both sides clamoring. One cohort about how I needed to keep reading the series, how my problems would be dealt with. Another about how it was awful, just terrible writing, a horrible Mary Sue protagonist. So what was it? What was the result? Well, I ended up reading book two, and I ended up giving a 1 hour long breakdown, basically ripping it apart piece by piece, giving my thoughts on Golden Sun, what I liked and what I disliked. But through all of it, the likes ended up kind of outweighing the dislikes for me, and honestly, at this point, I just kind of wanted to see the series through, which is why we're here talking about Morningstar Book 3 in the Red Rising Trilogy, and I'm going to give some closing thoughts not only on this book, but on the series as a whole, because I definitely have some. It was, I'm going to be honest, a really fun little journey for me to sort of go through this series. Not only do I kind of feel like these books are sort of a microcosm, an indicator, sort of where sci-fi was at the time, but also what it's like to watch an author progress along on their journey. Because if there was one thing that really stood out to me over the course of reading these books, it was the idea that Pierce Brown as a writer certainly improved over the course of this journey. And I think if I'm going to take away anything else from reading these books, is that I could so very clearly feel a difference from book one here to book three. Now, obviously, the series does continue. There's a sort of a second trilogy that's going on. I haven't read those yet. So this will contain spoilers for books 1 through 3 in the series. Please, if you're discussing things in the comments, keep things spoiler free for folks. So let's talk about this book. Let's talk about where things ended at the end of the last books and picking up here in book 3 in a box. Not a fun, I don't know if boxes would ever be fun. Not a fun box. Let's start it that way. People talk about how this book definitely gets a whole lot darker. There's certainly a bit of a tonal shift. And given the way that book two ended, I would say that is absolutely true. This book definitely feels a little bit more dark, not grim dark, I would say for sure. In fact, actively not grim dark. So I think this is also a really interesting point of the discussion, and I think we'll talk more about it as we get further along, especially when it comes to epic speeches and monologues. Where is a book dark versus grimdark? Now, grimdark, I think for a lot of folks, is more around the characters than anything else. It's a world where everybody is morally gray. Anyone will do anything they need to do to sort of get by and get past. There are no objectively good people. That's not this book. There are definitely some darker themes, obviously the idea of slavery and depression, the idea that you have these groups and casts of people who've been completely and utterly downtrodden, that you have others who see them only as numbers on charts. They're not even people to them. There are obviously some dark themes that are sort of explored in this, and the opening scenes of torture certainly fit into that sort of bucket. Now, I'm someone who's read quite a few books that have honestly way worse depictions of torture than this, so it wasn't really shocking to me, though I did see in some comments that some people thought it was like a lot for them, which given how I would say the first book definitely starts in, I would say, more of a YA spectrum, I can see how this could maybe be a bit shocking to people, honestly. But for me, I think it was a really interesting way of sort of setting the tone for the whole book, because we've had the rise, and every single book has sort of had a trend of sort of starting off low and building and then collapsing again. If you sort of look through the trends, obviously starting off book one, he's a lowly red, he goes through, eventually, rises through the ranks, and then we start off book two with him falling, only to rise up again, continue to find sort of that epic moment. You think victory is well in his hands, and then knock him back down again. So I think it's really interesting to sort of follow Darrow's path through this as he now starts off in certainly the worst conditions. And obviously we go through the series of the escape, realizing that Victor is still alive and not in the best condition. Sort of the plans and Severo coming back into the fore, and then we realize that it's been a year, or over a year, of him sort of dealing with, again, the worst, a box too small to lie down in, hands tied behind his back, being fed intravenously. It's bad. It's brutal. It's honestly like, I mean, yeah, not a great time to speak of. But the fact that he comes out of it not completely mentally destroyed, was a choice, was a decision. And I think the honest answer is that no human, no, I don't care how strong they are, I don't mentally, physically, I don't care about how much he's been carved, I don't care about any of the additional stuff, the strength of will. You would be insane. I mean, there's a reason that putting people alone by themselves, in isolation in prisons and things, literally drives people insane. Darrow would not be as sane as he needs to be for this. And this is where I think we find one of my few gripes with this third book, because a little bit of spoilers, this was absolutely the best of the three, and this was the one I had the absolute least gripes with as we continue to go through this. This is probably the first one, and one that honestly has the most simple explanation. The reason that Darrow is not a babbling mess, the reason that he's not completely unhinged and insane, is because the book needs to happen. It's really not any more complicated than that. I mean, I'd love to be sort of able to give some sort of crazy in-world answer, but honestly, this is just like, this is the writer needing to have the book happen. Now, could Pierce Brown have made the decision to not have it be a year, have it be a less extreme period of time? Probably. But as we get to the end of the book and we find the unveiling that happens there, that year kind of needs to happen in order for certain timelines to make sense. So I'm not totally against it. Does it make a whole lot of sense? Probably not. But again, this is so the book can happen. Obviously, they make their escape. We start to meet some of these side cast of characters. The lovely EMP makes another appearance. Hey, good stuff. Looking at you, broken piece of tech in this universe. Love to see it. Of course, then we never see another one again for the whole series, but yeah, I mean, it's fine. Or at least this book. But that's cool. They make their epic escape. The Reds appear. You realize there's so much more going on. The Sons of Ares have grown. The rebellion, the Rising, has continued to advance and evolve. And then, of course, we get to meet Sevro 2.0, aka the Reborn Ares, the figurehead of this movement. And this is where sort of the first segment of the book, I think, really comes into mind. I sort of break this book down into sort of a couple of key segments. And the first sort of opening one here of Darrow being rebuilt, rejoining the Rising, and then eventually needing to take the reins back from Sevro. This to me is really the first part of it. And I'll be honest, I kind of struggled to get through this first bit of it because I said it in my last video. These books are at their best when it's Darrow and Sevro just being a couple of badasses running around, tearing shit up. That's when it really thrives and shines. So to not have that dynamic as solidified at the start of this book, I think was honestly kind of a bold choice from Brown, but I think really just goes to show, like, when he's in his groove and in his element as a writer, boy, do these books really sing. So the first sort of opening section is you realizing that Sevro as a howler is amazing. As a tool, as a scalpel, as an instrument of Darrow's will, he really excels. He's smart, he's driven, he's dedicated, and he has the smarts to be able to improvise and adapt. But being able to improvise and adapt doesn't necessarily make you a charismatic leader. Now, there is a reason that the Howlers are sort of this collection of offshoots and rejects. It's because they really don't fall within any kind of traditional military hierarchy. They don't really fall on any kind of standard form of governance. They really act as their own independent unit. And that works for them. It works because no one else knows how to deal with them, which is amazing. But when you take that kind of mindset and mentality, now being additionally fueled and driven by this need for revenge for the killing of his father, that's when we start to see Sevro get, I think, a little bit unhinged and honestly sort of fall off in a way that I think is really healthy for their dynamic over the course of this book. Because obviously they go in, they have their mission to infiltrate and to find Quicksilver and to sort of launch the next step, this next phase of the operation. They've got these massive plans involving nukes and strikes, and they're going to cause mass chaos. And then, of course, you have the reveal that, obviously Mustang is still alive. The Telemanuses are in this. There's a potential sort of truce that's maybe being had. And, of course, Darrow proceeds to absolutely wreck that because, yeah, of course he does. Talk about a little bit of fun timing on that one. But I think this is really where we start to see the rest of this, I would call phase 2, sort of come into effect. Because obviously after this, everything goes to shit. Sevro and Darrow have this moment where everything is lost. They think they're going to die. They have to survive in the vacuum of space for minutes, which is kind of wild to think about. I think that's where the bioengineering is really coming into play for these people. And of course, they all do survive, or almost all do survive. And then, of course, we have one of the, I would say, probably one of the more egregious bro moments in the books, because, of course, how do two grown men who are best friends resolve things when they're angry? They have a fist fight, obviously, because we men are simple creatures, And that's how we deal with everything, just fight and then you get over it and you're best friends again. Maybe a little bit on the nose there, but I think the sentiment came through. And this is where we get the first of one of what I am going to talk about over the course of this book. So I'm going to call it his Sorkin moments. For those who aren't aware, Aaron Sorkin, famed TV writer for shows like The West Wing and The Newsroom, known for delivering some pretty darn epic monologues. And these sort of back and forth big, what are we fighting for, Mr. Frodo moments. One of the first ones here. And this is where I think where we are in the book and where these characters are makes all the difference. Because Brown attempted to do some of these really deep, powerful, driving speeches earlier on in the series. And they kind of worked for me. But I think now that the fact that these characters are older, they're a little bit wiser, maybe, a little bit more weathered, definitely. The fact that it was coming from these more mature mouths, it just felt like it landed, for me, so much better. And this is where that first moment where I went, could have been such a silly and contrived moment where really they're just going to fist fight and then they become friends again. It could have been such a contrived moment. But instead it was such a pure and honest and wholesome one. And I truly felt like the work that had been put in to get the characters to this point really paid off. And from this point onwards in the book, I basically didn't put it down. I really felt like this is where things started to ramp up when Darrow sort of stood back into his position as leader, when the relationship with Mustang ended up getting prepared. And then, of course, when they get to go down to the South Pole of Mars and sort of explore things and learn more about the world of the Obsidians. Fantastic. Now, obviously, this is where Ragnar gets his absolutely sick hero's ending. And this is where we start to see the world open up that little bit more, because again, I mentioned it in that last book that you will not be able to win this war without the Obsidians. But this is really when the immense scale of this really struck me, when you think about the hundreds of thousands of troops that they now need to start to coordinate in this. This is not a rabble. This is, sure, it's millions of people maybe across all the low colors, across all these different planets in the solar system, sure. But you're bringing in literally hundreds of thousands of the most feared, trained warriors in the world of man, in the society. And they're now kind of under the control of Darrow. And I say kind of because obviously, Ragnar's sister, she's got some thoughts. She's got some opinions about things. The Quiet coming in. And once she starts getting loud, she certainly continues it, to say the least. And we start to sort of have the pieces fit together. You still have Orion and the blues and the rest of the colors coming together. And yes, I thought it was a really smart sort of moment that sort of at this point, Brown points out the fact that, Darrow was kind of expecting the colors to work together that little bit more, and that it was taking time. And I really like that, because I think that's honestly what would happen. I mean, it's not just the Golds who have been channeled into this color system their entire lives. It's everyone. And yeah, sure, there may be resentment, but it's going to take a lot to unlearn, like if you're a gray, that you are still above a red. That would take time to unlearn. So I do appreciate the fact that not everything turned on a dime. And that's where I feel like that year that we lost made so much sense, because we started book 2 with a time skip and we're starting now book 3 with a time skip. But this one feels like it just really fit, and it added more than it took away. Not only the trauma and the terror that Darrow had to endure, but the way the rest of the society had to move forward in the wake of what happened to him, his execution, quote unquote, the release of the video of his carving, the idea that people can show that the lowliest red can rise to the absolute top of gold society. That in the right conditions, with the right people, it can be a sham. Again, undercut, in my opinion, by the fact that he had to go through all that surgery. I went through that at length in the first video. I'm not going to rehash it here. I do think that weakens the message a little bit, but we'll forgive it for the context of this story. Now, of course, things continue to ramp up. The capture of Cassius, of course, continues to be a key factor through this. And I think one of the coolest elements of this book, because constantly throughout this, there have been, obviously in book 2, it was the theme of betrayal. I talked about betrayal a lot. But in book 3, it's the theme of redemption, because they tried to have this moment, or Darrow did in book number 2. Tactus was there. He was potentially willing to change his stripes, to turn around, and Lorne cut him down, didn't give him a chance, didn't give him the option or the opportunity. But here in book 3, despite everything, Darrow is insistent on giving Cassius that chance. And considering it was their fracture that started all the conflict at the start of book 1, to now bring this full circle to give him a chance to redeem himself again, I just thought that was so immensely cool. And then, of course, various shenanigans unfold. You have the sort of attempted rebellion of the Obsidians. You have Severo having his absolute god tier moment. The idea that I'm going to hang myself with them and save me and save them. I mean, again, another epic speech, more sort of another moment that comes through. I mean, Severo just crushing it with the epic speeches this time around, gotta say. And again, I think moments that wouldn't have made sense in a book, 2 books ago, or even last book. I really do think the journeys these characters had to come on made so much sense. And the idea of, again, bringing Mustang back into the fold and people eventually starting to appreciate and trust Darrow's judgment. And I think it worked so well. Because even when the Telemanuses escape and then you come back in, Kavax and them, and who are, again, great characters, love these characters. And then they continue to prove Darrow right, his trust in Mustang, his trust in the Telemanuses, his trust in the Obsidians. All of it continues to show up and prove that, yes, Darrow was right. People can be redeemed. We can all work on this together. Quicksilver not actually being the enemy, choosing to trust him and realizing, yes, he is he is the son of Ares. Like, he is the founding member. Because all of that set the groundwork for the absolutely epic third act. This unreal moment where you think Darrow has won. He's tricked, the Jackal. They're heading to Earth, to Luna. They're going to have this crazy moment, and Darrow is going to have his moment of, being the actual kind human being. He's going to let Cassius go. He's going to have one good moment. He's going to let someone escape the carnage. And then, despite all of the people who have proved Darrow's intuition right, we have Cassius betray him. Betray him? But wait, not really. Not really. But wait, betray him? But yes. And this is where my noticing of small things hurt me a little bit. Because I will be honest, I think if you didn't see this twist coming, if you legitimately thought that all was lost, this would have been, the fact that he wasn't a traitor would have been an absolutely sick reveal. The second that we notice, the second that Brown mentions Severo putting on his a vest, a combat vest, and then we see him only getting shot in the chest. Oh, his heart beats. I knew in that moment this was all an act. I knew in that moment it's to convince the sister. Yes, Cassius is actually on their side. Holy crap. And I bet if you hadn't seen this twist coming, it would have been such a wild ride, an actual heart plummeting moment, in your gut. Oh no, everything's gone to crap. It's all gone wrong. I can see that really being the case. Now, for me personally, I kind of instantly guessed, there's been enough times where people like pufferfish venom when they go into a fake coma or whatever, that happens enough times in fiction that I did sort of see it coming. And I also just there's no way out. There is truly no way out of this. So, I don't think we're going to have all the main characters die, so they have to come out. Now, I will admit, I didn't predict it all. My thought was that our good old friend, the EMP, would make a return, and that when they went into the sort of key heart of the Sovereign's operation and sort of that deep bunker underground, I sort of think of it like the bunker underneath, the White House or whatever, that the vest was actually going to contain a shielded EMP and knock out all the infrastructure, both the defenses and the broadcasting, the communications, etc. Obviously, the Ash Lord is there in orbit, a massive threat that needs to be overcome. And I thought the way to do that was to try and sort of do something through sabotage. Now, obviously, it didn't quite work out that way. I still haven't figured out, is it Aja? Please let me know in the comments, fans of Red Rising. Am I pronouncing that right? A character who I honestly didn't expect to kind of end up being the final boss of this, but I guess makes sense. I do wish she'd had a bit more buildup. I guess she has, appearing originally when they met Lorne, and then again, obviously, at the South Pole. And I mean, obviously killing Ragnar. So, I mean, yeah, I guess she did end up kind of feeling like that, but this idea that she could still feasibly take them on kind of 1v3 and then not 1v4. Obviously, with Darrow missing a hand, his dominant hand, that does make a difference. But I don't know. I kind of felt like making the final battle that small, quote unquote, really, I don't know. I don't think it diminished things necessarily, but I don't know. I mean, I think for me, maybe I thought the scale of it would be bigger. And I think Brown tried to do that with the nukes. I just don't know if it quite landed for me. I think the final battle and the confrontation, the realization that it was, that whole sequence was sick. Absolutely sick. Again, putting the adrenaline and you realize that Severo's not dead. Again, I did predict that and see it coming, but I can see I mean, it was still awesome even knowing that. Even like, there's no way that there's going to be anything other. It's all fake, right? He's not really. They kept talking about his corpse too much and confirming that he was dead for him to be anything other than alive. And of course, I think the really the big reveal for that, of course, with me was the moment with Cassius and like, what did Darrow give him in video to sort of finally convince him to come back to their side. Obviously, the realization that the Sovereign, his mother's not safe in some villa somewhere. The Sovereign sending, death troopers to go deal with that or whatever, and realizing that you're never going to be on her side. She will always take you out in the end. And him having to come back and sort of rejoin the fold, and that it's those four, the four that we started with, all the way back in book number 1, to come back full circle in this to sort of turn things around. And I think that symmetry is beautiful. And I do think it was a really awesome sort of series of events through this. Again, a little scripted, a little telegraphed, the Jackal picking up Severo's pistol and replacing his own, of course, knowing that it's filled with blanks. I thought was like, well, that's such a fun little piece of foreshadowing. And then, of course, the final moments of like having to sort of bring the Ash Lord on their side. And then the final moment of realization that it hasn't actually been building up to Darrow to be this leader. He says, he's told us consistently that he doesn't want it. He doesn't want to take power. He doesn't want to be a dictator. But in the end, the grandson of the Sovereign being like, no, they've captured this. They've taken it by right. And then, of course, the character that we've realized all along is the leader, really. The one who can actually rebuild and recoordinate, the one who has been testing Darrow this entire time to see if he is the man of fortitude that she needs at her side. When, of course, she steps into the reins to lead. And Mustang sort of being that new figurehead and this hopefully better vision of tomorrow, this reformist, and saying, look, I will need to take this with an iron fist right now. The hope is that down the lines, maybe democracy can rule. And I think this was very smart in the sort of the way this ended, the whole reveal that, of course, Darrow is in fact still a father. I think that was really well foreshadowed. I figured it was something in that realm, like the whole moment of like Mustang talking to Darrow's mom. I thought maybe it was like, oh, I still do love him or whatever. And she's like, oh, be careful. Like, I wasn't quite sure how that was going to be end up revealed. And then the fact that there was a child this whole time, I thought was, wow, okay, that's, as a total mirror to the revelation that Io was killed while pregnant with his baby, the realization now that he does still have a son that he didn't even, or a son that he didn't even knew he had. Again, I think such great moments of symmetry sort of cemented by Brown over the course of this series. And I think he did a really good job of sort of putting a bow on this, but leaving him still room to play, which obviously he then did take up on as the fact that there are now still more books out that I haven't read and more books still being written. And in the end, we got the final book of this first trilogy. And wow, definitely the strongest of the three. Definitely a book that benefited from not only improvements from the writer, but time spent with these characters. Moments that would have felt, again, just over the top and cheesy and corny and cringe, even last book, but definitely in the first one, hit home in such a more positive way because they're adults who are, again, road worn and tired and battered and looking for something more and capable of doing more. They're not children anymore. And I know I've sort of brought this point up a lot. I think if he'd started the whole series with the characters just a few years older, this would have assuaged so many of the problems that I had with the earlier books. And I do think that the layers of different subjects that were touched upon and how they were dealt with and addressed over the course of the series, both from the individual evils of characters like the Jackal to the overarching systemic ones, like we see with the Sovereign and the society color system as well. The fact that Darrow has to make so many tough decisions over the course of these books, the idea that he makes decisions, he bombs the docks. He intentionally, puts the Moon Lords sort of in their place, knowing that he's killing thousands of his own countrymen, his fellow Reds. And I didn't really touch on the Moon Lords. I think they were a necessary part of the story, but I don't think they sort of added anything sort of too much here or there. This is still a pretty long review at this point, but I didn't want to make it quite as long as that last one, as I'm sort of just like collecting my final thoughts here, thinking about, is there anything else that I really want to add to this? I guess my final thoughts are, yeah, I think the series was worth it. I think it ended up, again, not necessarily deserving, at least at this point, of the absolute fervor that people defend it with. But I think a lot of people, as sort of identify, they couldn't get through the first book. And I totally understand why. Like, I think for me, the first book was a 3-star. I would say the second book was a 4-star. And I would say this is like a 4 to a 4.5 for me. It really did have a really nice arc and ramp and progression. But if you can't get through that first one, if you can't deal with Darrow, if you can't deal with the silliness of the tech inconsistencies and a child doing the things that he's doing, and the over the top, the fridge and everything else, the tropes and the Hunger Games dystopian, whatever, like if you can't get past that, I get it. I absolutely get it. And I don't think someone should have to go through 2.5 books or 2 books to really dig their teeth into something. So I am also like, I get those people. But I also do understand why people absolutely love and adore this series. Because when you have those epic moments, when you have those situations where characters are delivering these epic, heartfelt speeches that are really, jerking at the tears, I get it. Like, I do fundamentally get it. So yeah, that's the Red Rising trilogy. There are a couple more books to go. I will take probably a little bit of a break on the series for a bit, but then before the last one comes out, I think I'll definitely go through and review them all and continue on this thread, because it seems like you folks at home have been enjoying them. If you do like this content, of course, and do want to see more, of course, be sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video as well. It does make a difference here, of course, getting things out in the old algorithm. That's it for this one. That's it for the Red Rising trilogy and Darrow and Mustang and Severo, at least for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.